Hi, it's Sam Prentice from Game Squad, Project Mirkwood. I was the senior developer for the enemies, and today I'll be taking you through the MVPs for the project. So the MVPs that we managed to get out were Cinemal, enemy AI movement, enemy AI attack, unblocked player attacks, blocked enemy attacks, unblocked enemy attacks, and enemy AI spawning. For the effectiveness of time, those middle four, I'm going to take you through more or less at the same time. Enemy AI movement. The validation test that we had in place for this one was that the enemy game object would check every frame to see if it had a line of sight to the player, and if they did, they would move towards the player. First, you need an enemy, then we need to be able to make it move, and finally we set it off with a trigger. Okay, so in order to create an enemy, we created an enemy game object as a prefab, and we attached a rigid 2D body to it, a 2D rigid body, sorry. In order to make it move, we used physics, which is modular unity that would apply to the rigid body, and then obviously push it in the direction that we needed it to go. Finally, to set it off with the trigger, in order to check for the line of sight, we used raycasting, again, another modular unity, but more or less it's like shooting a laser beam between two game objects and seeing if there's anything that obstructs it, so it's actually a perfect fit. It will return, player if it was the player. Enemy AI attack. So the next four, like I said, they sort of overlap. We'll go through them all at the same time. More or less, they are inherently behaviors that are set around a conflict zone. So in order to do that, we've created a collider, but as a trigger around the player game object. And every time an enemy goes within that, obviously it triggers the collider and the events that occur. So if it's inside the conflict zone, the enemy starts attacking. Unblock player attacks. So if the enemy is inside the conflict zone and it's attacking, it needs to, but the player is attacking back, it needs to be able to take some damage. If the enemy's health reduces to 0, it needs to die. Blocked enemy attacks. So if the player is blocking, but the enemy is attacking, and it's all happening inside the conflict zone, as I said, then it will trigger the taking of less damage for the player and also delay the next concurrent attack for the enemy. So there should be a bit of a buffer there. Unblocked enemy attacks. So if in the event that the player is not blocking, but the enemy is attacking, we need to reduce health from the player. And the last list on our item list here is enemy spawning. So in order to make the game fun and interactive, we need to obviously be able to change the environment, and also, the game needs to continue to spawn enemies for defeating. So we do this by creating a clone of the enemy prefab game object, and we set that up to a limit to obviously set difficulty. All right, so let's take you through those now. As you can see, we have an enemy game object. It's seen us because there's nothing obscuring our line of sight, so it's moving towards us. Right? It no longer sees us, it stops. So a collider around us, it's inside the collider, it's attacking. It is taking damage from the player. Okay, if we block, inherently there's a delay between the next attack, which happens if we attack, the enemy takes damage and dies. As you've probably noticed, there is the spawning of more enemies as we change the active game screen. So if we move away, more will spawn. If we stay here, it will be capped at 6. That's it. Last but not least, we did actually get some extended features released as well. So enemy AI advanced movement, you might have noticed then when we lost line of sight at the enemy, it moved off at a 90-degree angle in a different direction. That's to unfree its obscurity. And then obviously the final boss and final death, we did get those released as well. So the final boss exists, and if we defeat it, we get additional points and things like that. All right.